The Great Gatsby, Chapter 6. About this time, okay, so at this point in the story, Gatsby and Daisy just saw each other for the first time. Gatsby took her over to his house, and at the end of the chapter, Nick left, and Gatsby and Daisy are holding hands. She doesn't seem weirded out at all about all of the many red flags about Gatsby's kind of stalkerish behavior. And so when Nick left, we all just kind of assumed, like, looks like those two are, gonna have a great evening. So chapter 6. About this time, an ambitious young reporter from New York arrived one morning at Gatsby's door and asked him if he had anything to say. Anything to say about what? Inquired Gatsby politely. Why, any statement to give out. It transpired, after a confused 5 minutes, that the man had heard Gatsby's name around his office in a connection which he either wouldn't reveal or didn't fully understand. This was his day off, and with laudable initiative, he had hurried out to see. It was a random shot, and yet the reporter's instinct was right. Gatsby's notoriety, spread about by the hundreds who had accepted his hospitality and so became authorities upon his past, had increased all summer until he fell just short of being news. Contemporary legends such as the underground pipeline to Canada attached themselves to him, and there was one persistent story that he didn't live in a house at all, but in a boat that looked like a house and was moved secretly up and down the Long Island shore. Just why these inventions were a source of satisfaction to James Gatz of North Dakota isn't easy to say. Okay, so let's break that down. A reporter has shown up to Gatsby's house, and he's just asking him, do you have any comment? And then Nick is basically telling us that Gatsby's notoriety spread about by the hundreds who had accepted his hospitality. So all those people who went to his parties who had been gossiping about him, like the gossip has gotten so out of control that reporters are like showing up at Gatsby's house. Like, who is this guy? What's he doing? And then he mentions contemporary legends such as the underground pipeline to Canada. So if you think about it, right, this is prohibition where alcohol was illegal. An underground pipeline is usually like a series of tunnels where people are smuggling in something that's illegal. So it sounds like people are gossiping that like he's moving in alcohol, maybe he's moving in other illegal substances. Like, we're not completely sure, but just the gossip is intense. And then at the end here, he says why this was all interesting to James Gatz of North Dakota isn't easy to say. So here's this new person, James Gatz. Here we go. James Gatz. That was really, or at least legally, his name. He had changed it at the age of 17 and at the specific moment that witnessed the beginning of his career, when he saw Dan Cody's yacht drop anchor over the most insidious flat on Lake Superior. It was James Gatz who had been loafing along the beach that afternoon in a torn green jersey and a pair of canvas pants, but it was already Jay Gatsby who borrowed a rowboat, pulled out to the Tuolumne, and informed Cody that a wind might catch him and break him up in half an hour. The Tuolumne is a boat. It's Dan Cody's yacht. I suppose he'd had the name ready for a long time, even then. His parents were shiftless and unsuccessful farm people. His imagination had never really accepted them as his parents at all. The truth was that Jay Gatsby of West Egg, Long Island, sprang from his platonic conception of himself. He was a son of God, a phrase which, if it means anything, means just that. And he must be about his father's business, the service of a vast, vulgar, and meretricious beauty. So he invented just the sort of Jay Gatsby that a 17-year-old boy would be likely to invent. And to this conception, he was faithful to the end. For over a year, he had been beating his way along the south shore of Lake Superior as a clam digger and a salmon fisher, or in any other capacity that brought him food and bed. His brown, hardening body lived naturally through the half-fierce, half-lazy work of the bracing days. He knew women early, and since they spoiled him, he became contemptuous of them, of young virgins because they were ignorant, of the others because they were hysterical about things which, in his overwhelming self-absorption, he took for granted. So we're coming to find out that Jay Gatsby's life, early life, like where he was born, his name even, we knew all of that was a lie. We just didn't know what parts of it were a lie, and now he's giving us the real story, right? This is who this man really was. And then he just kind of invented this other person because it's kind of the same reason like stars, when actors or musicians, when they start to get a lot of fame, sometimes they'll change their names, or sometimes before they even start to become famous, they change their name to be a more glamorous version of themselves. So like, a lot of celebrities, they weren't born with the names that they have now. And so what's a more glamorous name? James Gatz or Jay Gatsby, right? Like which one kind of sounds more like a movie star? Clearly Jay Gatsby. So he met this guy who was on a yacht, and he got on a boat and he went out because he was like working. He was doing all these menial jobs like fishing and clam digging, and he knew that there was a storm coming because he was used to the area. And so he rode out to tell this rich man, Dan Cody, hey, there's this huge storm coming. You need to dock your yacht or it's going to get destroyed. Okay, so top of page 99. But his heart was in a constant turbulent riot. The most grotesque and fantastic conceits haunted him in his bed at night. A universe of ineffable gaudiness spun itself out in his brain, while the clock ticked on the washstand and the moon soaked with wet light his tangled clothes upon the floor. Each night he added to the pattern of his fancies until drowsiness closed down upon some vivid scene with an oblivious embrace. For a while, these reveries provided an outlet for his imagination. They were a satisfactory hint of the unreality of reality, a promise that the rock of the world was founded securely on a fairy's wing. Okay, so that paragraph is pretty dense. I'm going to read that paragraph again. I want you to picture him as a young kid, right? Like 15, maybe 14, 15, and he's lying in bed at night, and he's just kind of staring at the ceiling of his bedroom, and he's growing up poor. His parents are farmers. He lives in North Dakota. He's kind of like a nobody. Everybody's somebody. Sorry, that was the wrong way to say that. Okay, so he's like lying in bed at night and just dreaming of this fantasy world, of this version of himself that he knows that he could be, this luxurious, rich person that he actually has kind of become. Okay, so top of 99 again. But his heart was in a constant, turbulent riot. The most grotesque and fantastic conceits, so these ideas that were not shaped like reality, but felt like reality, haunted him in his bed at night. A universe of ineffable gaudiness, of like undescribable beauty and luxury, spun itself out in his brain while the clock ticked on the washstand and the moon soaked with wet light his tangled clothes upon the floor. Each night he added to the pattern of his fancies until drowsiness closed down upon some vivid scene with an oblivious embrace. For a while, these reveries provided an outlet for his imagination. They were a satisfactory hint of the unreality of reality, a promise that the rock of the world was founded securely on a fairy's wing. An instinct toward his future glory had led him, some months before, to the small Lutheran College of St. Olaf's in southern Minnesota. He stayed there 2 weeks, dismayed as its ferocious indifference to the drums of his destiny, to destiny itself, and despising the janitor's work with which he was to pay his way through. Notice again, he's doing like physical labor. He's not rich yet. Then he drifted back to Lake Superior, and he was still searching for something to do on the day that Dan Cody's yacht dropped anchor in the shallows along shore. Cody was 50 years old then, a product of the Nevada silver fields, of the Yukon, of every rush for metal since 75. So Dan Cody had gotten rich because of basically like the gold rush, right? He had struck gold, so he's new money. The transactions in Montana copper that made him many times a millionaire found him physically robust, but on the verge of soft-mindedness. And suspecting this, an infinite number of women tried to separate him from his money. The none too savory ramifications by which Ella Kay, the newspaper woman, played Madame de Maintenon to his weakness and sent him to sea in a yacht were common knowledge to the turgid sub or suppressed journalism of 1902. He'd been coasting along all too hospitable shores for 5 years when he turned up as James Gatz's destiny in Little Girl Bay. To young Gatz, resting on his oars and looking up at the railed deck, that yacht represented all the beauty and glamour in the world. I suppose he smiled at Cody. He'd probably discovered that people liked him when he smiled. At any rate, Cody asked him a few questions. One of them elicited the brand new name and found that he was quick and extravagantly ambitious. A few days later, he took him to Duluth and bought him a blue coat, 6 pairs of white duck trousers, and a yachting cap. And when the Tuolumne left for the West Indies and the Barbary Coast, Gatsby left too. He was employed in a vague personal capacity. While he remained with Cody, he was in turn steward, mate, skipper, secretary, and even jailer. For Dan Cody sober knew what lavish doings Dan Cody drunk might soon be about, and he provided for such contingencies by reposing more and more trust in Gatsby. The arrangement lasted 5 years, during which the boat went 3 times around the continent. It might have lasted indefinitely, except for the fact that Ella Kay came on board one night in Boston, and a week later Dan Cody inhospitably died. I remember the portrait of him up in Gatsby's bedroom, a gray, florid man with a hard, empty face. The pioneer debauchee who, during one phase of American life, brought back to the eastern seaboard the savage violence of the frontier brothel and saloon. It was indirectly due to Cody that Gatsby drank so little. Sometimes in the course of gay parties, women used to rub champagne into his hair. For himself, he formed the habit of letting liquor alone. Okay, so what has happened is he goes out and tells Dan Cody, this random rich person that he doesn't know, hey, there's a storm coming. You need to dock your boat or it's going to get ruined. And Dan Cody's like, well, thanks. That was really, thank you. And then he brought him on board and kind of got to know him. And remember, Gatsby's charming. He's got this smile. Remember, Nick has described his smile multiple times. Like, he's got this smile that just makes you feel like he sees you and gets you. So Dan Cody immediately trusts him, takes him on his boat, and then kind of makes him his assistant, sort of. And he teaches him all the things a person needs to know about how to be rich. He buys him clothes. He just kind of makes him his gopher, his go-to person, and teaches him all the ways of a rich life. And Dan Cody's a drunk, or he's an alcoholic, and that's why Gatsby doesn't drink. And that's very true in real life, that a lot of times if people grow up or spend a lot of time around people who are very unhealthy alcoholics, they can go one way or the other, right? They can either drink too much, or they can just, nope, I never want to drink again. And that's how my mom is, actually, that my grandpa was an alcoholic. And so my mom is like, nope, never drink ever, not even a glass of wine ever. Okay, so we're on the bottom of 100. And it was from Cody that he inherited his money, a legacy of $25,000. He didn't get it. He never understood the legal device that was used against him, but what remained of the millions went intact to Ella Kay. And Ella Kay, I ain't saying she's a gold digger. He was left with his singularly appropriate education, the vague contour of J. Gatsby had filled out to the substantiality of a man. He told me all this very much later, but I've put it down here with the idea of exploding those first wild rumors about his antecedents, which weren't even faintly true. Moreover, he told it to me at a time of confusion, when I had reached the point of believing everything and nothing about him. So I take advantage of this short halt while Gatsby, so to speak, caught his breath, to clear this set of misconceptions away. It was a halt, too, in my association with his affairs. For several weeks I didn't see him or hear his voice on the phone. Mostly I was in New York, trotting around with Jordan and trying to ingratiate myself with her senile aunt. But finally I went over to his house one Sunday afternoon. I hadn't been there 2 minutes when somebody brought Tom Buchanan in for a drink. I was startled, naturally, but the really surprising thing was that it hadn't happened before. They were a party of 3 on horseback. Tom and a man named Sloan and a pretty woman in a brown riding habit who had been there previously. All right, so Tom and these 2 rich friends are out and about, and they happen by Gatsby's house, and they're on horseback. Think about it. What kind of money is horseback riding? Old money, new money. I'm delighted to see you, said Gatsby, standing on his porch. I'm delighted that you dropped in. As though they cared. Sit right down. Have a cigarette or a cigar. He walked around the room quickly, ringing bells. I'll have something to drink for you in just a minute. He was profoundly affected by the fact that Tom was there, but he would be uneasy anyhow until he'd given them something, realizing in a vague way that that was all they came for. Mr. Sloan wanted nothing. A lemonade? No thanks. A little champagne? Nothing at all, thanks. I'm sorry. Did you have a nice ride? Very good roads around here. I suppose the automobiles. Yeah. Moved by an irresistible impulse, Gatsby turned to Tom, who had accepted the introduction as a stranger. I believe we've met somewhere before, Mr. Buchanan. Hey.